All right, welcome everybody. Anybody watching on the playback, thanks for coming back and watching. My guest tonight is Dr. Melissa Oddie. She's a bee researcher, and I'll let her tell you about herself, and we're gonna just get right into it. So, welcome, Dr. Melissa Oddie. How are you doing today?
Hi, Bruce. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for coming on. If you could, just like any type of conversation here, I don't know too much about your background. I did watch a few of the interviews that you've done on other channels, and they're interesting. So, but we just there's a little bit of a different channel from the other ones. So, if you could just tell us, a little bit about your background and what it is that you enjoy about bees and doing bee
Yeah.
research.
Okay. Origin story time. So, I can start with my interest in bees, which started in probably kindergarten when I was taken on a field trip to. I guess it wasn't a production facility. It was kind of like a museum for honeybees and stuff. And they had a couple of hives out back, and they had this little interactive area and stuff. There's an observation hive there, and I was glued to that hive for almost the entire time. Uh, and so I was just completely obsessed. Bees were incredible. I just loved watching them. I loved how they worked. And then this worker came in with a drone on his hand. He's like, "Who wants to hold a bee?" And of course, everyone's like, "Oh, a bee," but me in the front row was like, Me, me, I do." So my hand shot up there, and I was the first one to hold this drone, which of course didn't sting, but that was kind of my introduction to honeybees, and I've really loved them ever since. So I started working on them actually in my PhD. So I had kind of a bachelor's and a master's in zoology, conservation biology, and that's when I got to learn of the problem with Varroa and how bad it was for the bees and how many colonies it was decimating. But I also started reading up on some populations in Europe that had actually begun to evolve resistances. There was, Barbara Locke was doing stuff, and Yves Leconte, they published first, and I was reading them, and there was all that the Baton Rouge lab stuff, which was breeding VSH bees, and I found that absolutely fascinating. So I wrote. I actually wrote like a physical letter and had my resume attached, and I sent it to a lab in Switzerland that was doing bee health. And it just so happens that at that particular time that I sent them this letter saying I want to do a PhD, I want to do a resistance, Varroa resistance. Do you have anything for me? They got a letter from Norway saying, we have this population of bees that the beekeeper said he hasn't treated for about a decade, and he's not treating, and he's doing fine. Do you want to send someone to research this? So the overlap just kind of worked out absolutely perfectly. They hired me on, and they sent me up to Norway to research the bees of a man called Tarjei Reinertsen, who had a buckfast stock in Norway that he wasn't treating at all. So they sent me up there to figure out exactly what was going on. And the rest is history. So I was researching them, and then I got hired on in Norway after my postdoc to run a breeding program where we were basically replicating what he did, except I was tracking everything scientifically. So that's where we are.
Okay, well, that's sounds great. That's definitely something I would like to do. But so originally I was going to send you a bunch of questions so you could be prepared, but it's possible you might not be prepared for all of these. But something I like to ask
All right,
people,
bring it. We can do it.
I had an evolutionary biologist on here before, so I liked the way he explained some things. But I like to ask people, what would happen I guess I would have to say the United States because there's so many other countries where honeybees are doing fine without treatments. But what would happen if humans just stopped keeping bees in the United States? Would would they go extinct from varroa mites if they were just left alone? Like, what do you think would
Beekeeping.
happen?
That's a good question because I want to say honeybees themselves are actually an introduced species to North America, so their origins are in Europe. Um, so I think probably some populations would actually be fine, as we've seen in a lot of countries that didn't have the means for treatment when Varroa was introduced. They lost a lot of bees, but they didn't lose all the bees, and the bees kind of kept back. And we have evidence from this island in Sweden called Gotland where people just left a bunch of bees and just didn't treat them and left them to their own devices, and a lot of them did actually recover. The population replenished itself. And in France as well, the resistant population that they started with was an abandoned apiary that they found hives in that were just there. Okay, so I think, you know, some bees would actually be fine.
You mean like
Is that
right
the
away?
question?
Yeah. Well, you mean I think what you're saying is in the first few years, but I mean like if people were removed completely, what how would the honeybees look in 50 years or 20 years from then?
Um,
Once
I'm
the survivors were
actually I'm actually not sure. I don't know how well feral colonies do in North America because they are not a native species. I assume maybe in the South some of them would actually be okay if they weren't kept. You would have feral colonies, which would turn into wild colonies eventually.
okay. And then
So, but I mean, if the question is like if we stop controlling the mite completely, are bees all gonna die out? The answer is probably no.
right. Right, they would probably, you know, there would be a vast die off, right? But it would
There would, and there
but
has been.
and yeah, and the strongest would not the strongest, but you know, the most fit would be left, you know, to
The ones
repopulate.
that had mechanisms that could accommodate the parasite and deal with it. The mechanisms that I study aren't novel or new mechanisms. They're actually behaviors that the bees have always had to deal with pathogenic threats within their hive. They've just been co-opted to be more sensitive to Varroa and target Varroa.
Okay, so that's actually good. I'm glad you said that because that's part of one of my questions, which was what you would say if I were to assert that it takes thousands of years for honeybees to become resistant to mites, either on their own or by selection, by artificial selection or natural selection. Thousands of years. What do you think about that? Have you ever heard that before? Because I know I have.
So, I mean, how evolution and evolutionary time usually works is, yeah, it would take normally thousands of years to adapt new traits or to change a population or a species significantly, yes. Um, Honeybees are exceptional in that they have a lot of different traits that allow them to increase their genetic diversity. And they have a lot of very complex behaviors. And the gene transfer regarding those behaviors is absolutely exceptional. So they can change their behavioral repertoire very quickly from generation to generation. We're finding that. And they also have these behaviors which have a bit of plasticity in and of themselves in that generation. So they're very adaptive within one generation and they're very adaptive between generations. So I don't know if we can do a little honeybee biology 101. So you know, they have this multi-drone mating system where the queen mates with multiple different drones, and what that gives you is different patrilines in the colony, and each patriline actually is more or less good at different things. So the higher diversity of patrilines you have in a colony, generally the more robust your colony, the better it is at surviving one threat or another threat. So that's one way that diversity, you know, is maximized and benefits a colony as a whole. Then you've got something called genetic crossover. So during meiosis, the division of sex cells, when the chromosomes are all lined up, they actually swap genetic material before they split. And that increases genetic diversity, you know, between generations. Honeybees have the highest rate of genetic crossover of any multicellular organism, pretty much. It's incredibly high, and it is the highest in segments of the chromosome that code for worker behavior. So they have a huge amount of diversity and a huge amount of genetic flexibility when you're looking at behaviors. So their ability to change is off the charts. It's amazing what they can do. And you know what that looks like in real life is you're seeing this beekeeper that I worked with, you know, he stopped treating in 1998, and in about 5 years he had most of his stock back, and he was continuing to not treat and then beekeeping as normal.
Yeah. So what you said about genetic diversity and how the queen mates with, you know, over a dozen drones. I just imagine what if those dozen or more drones uh, didn't didn't contain any drones from colonies that were propped up. Like they could be diverse and also from naturally selected patcher lines. It's just something I feel like
Yeah.
a lot of the weakest, the most unfit genetics are out there. I don't know if they're the majority, but they definitely throw a little wrench in to queen breeding.
It's difficult to categorize things as like, genetically fit or unfit because there are so many different elements that the bees have to contend with, whether it's food gathering or threat
Yeah,
protection or parasite control and stuff. So something that may serve the colony less well in one category might serve them much better in another category. And I don't think we really have a system where we can grade the fitness of each kind of patry line or each drone trait
right,
because they all have many different traits. So trying to guess what's good and what's not good is very difficult, especially if you want to narrow or bottleneck the genetic diversity of your stock to say you know maybe just silver bullet one particular problem. You end up losing a lot of genetic diversity that could help you with other problems.
right. So yeah, and what it that agrees kind of with what I think, which is focusing on mite counts solely as your criteria for what colony is a good queen. Um, can the mite counts don't always correlate. There's a thousand other uh, variables as you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and we had interesting results from the breeding program that we ran for I think the last 4.5 years. Where I was tracking, mite counts on the bottom boards were actually a selection criteria, but they didn't change a lot as a population average. But we did manage to tank the infestation rates in the brood in autumn, which is a really big thing because if there's no mites in your brood in autumn, they're not spreading the virus to your winter bees. So that was a significant thing, and then the hygienic behaviors increased. But from our data, we find that actually Varroa counts, even though you're selecting on that from a population perspective, you might not see a change immediately. It's much more complicated than that, and it depends what kind of colonies you have around you and how many mites they have, and because they share mites horizontally as well. It's not just
right.
population within the colony.
Yeah, and what you said something like there's not a way to tell exactly who's fit and who isn't fit. And just the way I tell that is if they're dead or not. I mean, I don't know if there's any
And that's
clear
the
of a way.
easiest. It's definitely a clear way. If the colony is dead, pretty sure it didn't cut it.
Yeah, and if it,
But at the same time, colonies can also die for different reasons
yeah, yeah, yeah.
as well.
So
Like
so
we had in our program, we lost some colonies to Nosema, and I'm like 90% sure it was Nosema and not Varroa, because of the conditions and the mite counts and other factors stuff. So we did lose colonies, but I couldn't say that it was because of Varroa.
okay. Let's see. So I'm just gonna go down down my little list here. Sorry, I don't normally
Yeah,
prepare. I usually just go by the seat of my pants. But
no worries. And if you have a question in between, just ask it. We'll go. This is super chill.
so these are all things that I worry about because I mean not that I worry about that I wonder about because I don't get to talk to researchers too much. To be honest, the few that I do know I don't really even get along with, except for the one evolutionary biologist I had in here. He was great, but why do all the research, a lot of the research that I see is in other countries? Why do they not research any populations? It seems as they don't really do too much research here in the United States. Is it because they just assume there's no survival stock here, or what would be the reason
So
for
there,
that?
there actually is quite a lot of research in the States. It's probably done in a different way because a lot of the beekeepers are industrial scale beekeepers. They're pollination beekeepers, not honey production beekeepers. So I do know of a few universities that are working with beekeepers, maybe less on the hobby side, although I can't speak for each state individually. I can describe the situation in Europe is that a big beekeeper is maybe 2 to 3,000 hives. That's a big one, and most of them are small scale. There might be a little more funding in Europe for honeybee research and things like that. I'm not exactly sure,
Yeah,
but I would say probably, because there are a few more labs working on it or working on it peripherally with other things and stuff. In terms of the mite resistant research, a lot of it did start in Europe, and that's kind of where the labs picked up. That's where we wrote most and we researched most, and it's come in to a couple of labs in the States. That's some of the, I think the Baton Rouge lab was doing it almost first at one point. They were definitely one of the earlier labs. But maybe because of the industrial scale of a lot of beekeepers, it just wasn't much of an interest at first, because it's really difficult to breed hives for Varroa resistance when you have so many hives, and you need them for one purpose, which is pollination.
right. Yeah,
So it's maybe it's also a need as well.
yeah, I may have accidentally said something about resistance or mite resistance. I almost never say that over here. What I mean, what I do, and what I have done is always unassisted survival is what it is, because I'd never count mites. I mean, my inspector counted mites. I don't care about mites. I don't look at them. I My bees get their butt kicked every year. They get kicked and stomped on. And this year I had I think 7 die out of 73, and that's and I have a pretty good winter here in
Yeah.
Pennsylvania. I don't know, it's not the coldest,
Yeah.
but it's not the warmest, and this is in a year when I guess a whole ton of bees supposedly died. I don't know. I'm hearing different
I've been
things.
reading about that. They're still looking for causes.
Yeah, so I don't know. So it does seem like they're always focused on Varroa mites, which it is a big, that's a big problem, obviously. But I don't see anyone being really successful, just focused on mites for some reason. I mean, because
Not
as you said,
completely,
they have to
because you
focus
also
on
have all
everything.
these other traits.
You're right. Yeah, you need.
A beekeeper's got a stock, and they need to keep good bees. So the bees
Yeah,
have to fill out different categories as well. So when we designed this breeding program in Norway, I was like, we're not going to focus on mites. Aren't even going to be the main focus. It's commercial traits first, and we will put mites in the algorithm, as well, so that we retain the honey production, we retain the docility, which is very important, how gentle they are. And then the mites are going to be in it, but secondary to honey production and size and docility. And yeah, we got interesting results from it. Like I said, we got the increase in hygienic behaviors that I was looking at, and we had the decrease in the brood infestation rates, even in just 4 years.
well, that's pretty quick. That's definitely not 1,000 years.
Definitely not 1,000 years. And then the really cool thing is, for all the years that I've been researching these things, we've had control populations have been treated regularly, or supposedly have nothing to do with resistance. But there are 1 or 2 hives in pretty much every control population I've looked at that actually do score really well. They have mites under control. They have a high level of hygienic behaviors. So the fact that they're present there tells me that I think a lot of populations are going to have the potential to actually become resistant.
Yeah, on a podcast or a video or some media I was reviewing the other day, one of the beekeepers. It was a group. It was a trio of beekeepers talking, and one of them pointed out that the other one, even though they treated like just according to the book, forever since they started, that they still were running tests and found that this beekeeper still had a couple colonies that scored really high, as you're saying, on whatever type of assay they did or something like that. So that's crazy to me. That's crazy that if you told a treater, a treating beekeeper, that absolutely, stop selection by fixing every possible problem, is still having some type of resistance despite all that propping. I
Yeah,
don't know.
and
So
I
imagine if
think
you
you can't. Sorry.
no, just saying, imagine if there is no propping like what I do here. Um,
Yeah, and
no.
I think even for people who treat regularly, I think it's very difficult to eliminate 100% of the selective pressure that mites are putting on. Because every environment is different and every year is different. So, treating according to a schedule, if you're treating like clockwork at a specific day of the month, might not fly because you've got different environmental, spring might start a little earlier or something like that. So you might miss the ideal treatment window at any one time, and then you're still getting mite pressure. And even if you're treating, some mites are still surviving. The pressure is not going to go away. So that's why I think that you still got colonies that have these traits that stand out.
And if you're open mating, sometimes maybe some genetics sneak in, from somewhere else. But
Exactly.
um,
Exactly. And Pharaoh colonies are going to be good for that because nobody's helping them. So if they're out there and they survived, they must have something that allows them to do that.
right. So one thing I wanted to bring up, since I don't have researchers on here much, is about bias in research. I used to never have any reason to question research. I would say, oh, check out this research. It says, whatever, drones do this. Okay, I totally believe it. I didn't have any doubt in it until I was brought into a research project that I had to quickly leave because I could see it was just going terribly. How What do you think about that? Do you see like your colleagues, uh, you know, performing research, and do you see bias in there? Like if they start out as a beekeeper, like they're already a beekeeper, they've been treating since they started learning how to keep bees. How can they do a research paper that says, let's find out if bees can survive without treatments? And that research is to be presented to commercial beekeeping industry.
Right. So I mean, I think you brushed on the issue that a lot of people have with research, because when you're reading this, you're basically trusting us to know what we're doing and to present it in an honest and and proper way. And that is a responsibility that all scientists have, to whatever degree that we accomplish that task. I believe that is very important. There are a lot of different places bias can come from. I mean, every human being has bias based on their worldview, their interpretation, what they think is going on. And as a general rule, humans tend to look for evidence that align with their worldview or how they think. It's very difficult to untangle. We're supposed to be trained to do this. And one of the ways we eliminate bias is we come up with empirical tests that are completely neutral. We come up with good experimental designs that can be repeated, very important one. So if someone says, yeah, I don't believe that, I'm going to do it myself, they actually can. If you have a study, that is very vague with the methods, or the methods are really difficult to follow, that's a red flag that you can question and stuff. I'm a statistical analyst as well, so I get to look at the statistics and can say, okay, well, that wasn't done well, or that was actually done really well over here. And we have a process for scientific literature called peer review. And basically anything you find in a scientific journal, a reputable scientific journal, the paper before it is published is sent to at least 2 different reviewers, so other scientists that will read this paper, and their job is basically to tear it apart. Their job is to question the methods, to question what was done, to make sure it's concise and stuff. So before anything is published, it goes through pretty significant review. And then you have another layer of bias on that, is once it is published in a scientific journal, then the rest of the media picks it up. And there have been a couple of times where I've given interviews or I've written articles and stuff, and some of this, what I've said, has been reinterpreted in a way that may not exactly reflect what I was trying to say. And a lot of headlines like to shorten or truncate or reimagine things that were said, that end up just being much farther from the truth of the paper. So I mean, my advice and my recommendation is always ask questions. Never just believe anything wholeheartedly without questioning. So question who wrote it, what their motives were, what
Oh
they're
yeah.
trying to accomplish. And if you read a sensational headline that makes you feel like angry or overwhelmed and stuff, definitely question that. Because if someone wants to make you angry, chances are they have a goal outside of just relating information.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for that. Uh, I kind of like I had the analogy of that. I don't want to like beat that subject up, but like if I was a lifelong vegan, could I possibly do a research paper saying the health benefits of steak? It would be tough. There would have to be some
Yeah.
type of blind
And in
study.
theory, a good scientist would be able to do that.
Yeah,
But
maybe.
again, scientists are all human as well, and we all have perspectives and biases.
What are your thoughts on mite bombs? Are they?
Mite bombs, so colonies that get so many mites that they just kind of
I don't
either by
know. I
robbing
really
or something else that's spread.
Well, yeah, I've heard different definitions of what a mite bomb is. It's could be many things. A colony that's dying that absconds and takes a bunch of mites everywhere, or it's dying and it gets robbed and takes a bunch of mites everywhere. And then I don't know, I've heard like that usurpation could be a mite bomb, a colony, but I can't find any of this evidence. I mean, I don't treat any of my bees. I've had what my inspector would probably call mite bomb. I had 52 mites in a 300 sample. Um, Bees that survived. I've had some that died, and I don't know where the bomb went to, but I'm just wondering, what do you think of that? Has any of the research you've analyzed the data pointed to mite anything that could be defined as a mite bomb?
Yeah, I mean, I can give you my definition of mite bomb, and there was a really good paper out of Cornell University a few years ago, like mite bomb or robber lure, like what is the actual mechanism of Varroa transfer. So what I see a mite bomb is like as you said, like a colony that is not doing very well, that is about to collapse, that just has way too many mites. It's just overcome with mites. And the method of transfer, I think, is probably the crux of the issue here. And this paper talked about these mite bombs not exactly absconding and sharing their mites, but being really attractive to robbing. So having stronger colonies come in for the resources, and then the mites, which are kind of like rats on a ship, know the ship's going down, and they jump on as many bees as they can and just get out of there, and they spread. There was a decent amount of evidence for colonies being more robber lures and just sharing mites that way. And the mite itself is very highly adapted to use honeybees as a host. They originally evolved on Apis cerana, which is the Asian honeybee, but they do pretty well on European honeybees because the colony lifestyle and structure is almost the same. So they are designed to jump ship and to spread to other colonies as much as they can. We have made this a lot easier because our colony densities, so the number of hives we keep close together, is much higher than the natural average, which is about one hive per square kilometer. We have tens to hundreds of these hives in yards, so it is so easy for the mites to jump to different colonies, either by horizontal transfer, just drift, or robber lures.
Yeah, I think that can be looked at in a couple ways. Like I don't know, 60 in the backyard where a few died. I'm not sure why. I mean, maybe two were starvation. Who knows? The other ones could have been mites. I don't know, or could have been a queen issue. But the fact that they are crowded puts them under even more pressure. Like puts them under even
Yeah.
tougher pressure than bees that are a kilometer. One per kilometer. Like what's so tough about that? I don't know. It's not the toughest life. And just as a bee remover, as somebody who does removals for a long time, like many a year, it does seem like there's a lot more than that. But maybe that's just here in Pennsylvania. I didn't even get what area are you from? Are you on the East Coast of the USA? Uh,
So I was actually raised in Canada. I've been working in Europe for the last decade on honeybees in their natural range, but mostly, domestic bees, bees that are kept by people.
oh, okay. And that's another thing I never even thought of. Everybody will generally say that honeybees are a domestic, like what do you call it, livestock, but not in Europe.
Yeah.
They're wild there. So
Well, they had so we have a lot of different subspecies and and variants of honeybee in Europe. There are, I think, over 50 different kinds, just in different regions and stuff. And they are wild. They're natural. So they're native species to the area. Now we've been keeping bees for so long, hundreds and hundreds of years, that most of them in the areas now are domestic, or they're feral offshoots of domestic hives. So finding a truly wild hive is going to be very, very difficult in Europe, especially since Varroa. Because that really just decimated wild populations very efficiently.
okay.
So yeah, but I mean, if you want to get into it, there's a lot of different subspecies of honeybee, and they look fairly similar, but a lot of them have some differences either in color or wing shape or very size. But yeah,
Yeah, I
so
was thinking
there are a lot of different.
they don't see like state or city lines or anything. They can just cross them
No,
and cross, or they just go wherever. Like you would think there would be maybe some phenotype pretty tightly to this area and one tight over here, but in the middle it would just kind of be blurred, wouldn't it?
yeah. There is an issue with conservation of these different groups because we have domestic hives and we actually are moving hives and crossbreeding bees. Like the buckfast is not a natural subspecies. It was crossed from British black and Italian ligustica originally, and that's what gave you the buckfast. But we've got carniolan bees, we've got Iberico, like Apis mellifera iberica or Iberico. Anyway, and a lot of different Carpensis, and each of these have unique traits for that specific region. So you've got honeybees that are better in the mountains. You got honeybees that are better in the Mediterranean and stuff. And although a lot of those genetics have been a little bit washed out from domestic hives and the populations that we brought in, you can still find pretty decent lineages there left of the original stocks.
So let me ask you this: if uh, all the bees that I have are from removals, some of them date back to 2015, 2016, just direct matrilineal line all the way down that I haven't lost track of.
Hmm.
Um, if they're from a tree in the forest in 2016 and they're put into a box, right? But they're never treated. They're not on foundation. They're basically they're just living in my structure. I didn't do anything to alter their anything about them at all. Nothing. No. And I have they swarm. I capture their swarms, put them also into boxes. This population of bees that I have, they're in boxes, but they're not altered in any way. They don't know that they're in boxes. They just are they domestic or are they feral bees?
Uh, that's interesting. I would say they're probably still feral, because if you're not doing any sort of management. But I mean, a feral hive is really just a hive that isn't kept. So depending on what your definition of kept is, it could be domestic or feral. I mean, the distinction, the true distinction comes between feral or wild. A wild honeybee is a bee that is naturally supposed to be there, that is it has a wild lineage that has been there for a very long time, whereas a feral colony is like a wild cat. It got out somewhere and it's just living in the wild, but
Yeah,
its original stock is domestic.
right. Yeah. So yeah,
So
it's
I
just
would say
something.
all of honeybees in North America are probably feral bees, because you never really had an original population because they're not native to North America.
Right. But if you are treating them, and let's say you're selecting for whatever a certain level of gentleness, not just regular gentleness. You're selecting, you're feeding, you're providing pollen. You're really doing everything to make them dependent on you. Those I would consider not feral.
Yeah,
And
those are domestic.
if they were to escape, they'd probably die. Right? Just be removed from the gene pool pretty quickly.
They may not. It's
Yeah, yeah, they may not, but
I would say whatever. I mean, to make a something feral domestic again, you just really need to just take care of it.
yeah. Um, but before I do want to talk about your book, because just
Oh
to
yeah.
tell me a little bit about that. But then I still have a few more questions there. But
Let's do some more questions too. I think we got time.
you want to do some more questions? Okay. Let's see. Sorry, I have really bad eyes, so I took. So my friend Natalie B talks about so a lot of people talk about mite bombs, and she has what she talks about is drone bombs, which is kind of what I was saying. Let's say somebody like me I have all what I would call feral bees. They're just in boxes or kept feral bees because almost all of them literally came out of trees that have been in trees, and I even have tree trunks with bees in them. But she talks about a drone bomb is actually more detrimental to someone like me because of say some commercial beekeeper moves a quarter mile down the road and brings in a bunch of pollination bees that are absolutely dependent on them every every step of the way. It's those drones that can just really mess up the whole not wild population but the gene pool of feral or even treatment free beekeepers bees. What would you think about that?
Interesting. I think if drones are being produced naturally, I don't know if you could get enough drones in a hive to actually bolster the mite numbers to extremely damaging levels, or at least not beyond what they could do in a normal hive. I think you'd have to have a drone layer probably to do that, because of course mites do reproduce like twice as well on drone brood.
But
It takes
I
time.
don't mean by the drones. I don't mean by the mites. What I mean is by the drones passing their genetics to unmated queens on
If you have
mating
an
flights.
open mating system, that's always a difficulty. If you have uncontrolled genetics that are not part of your stock, and you have this population that it's regularly treated, you can get something like washout. It's possible. um, it's difficult. I mean, different ways to get around it. If you have a mating station that is isolated from these bees coming in, if you have stock in your own that you can control, and you don't want it breeding with your hives. What we did in Norway is we had queen excluders on the bottom of the hive, which actually prevented the drones from flying out. So you can kind of just put a cap on the colonies that you don't want breeding. Some will get out, but not a lot of them. So you
That's
can
a good
control
idea.
the genetics a little bit in that way. But if you have something that you can't control, and you just have a lot of drones flying from a population that doesn't have resistance development, yeah, the risk of washout is definitely present, which makes this whole thing much harder, right? As the space you need to actually breed these bees successfully, because you do need to have a little bit of a handle on the genetics.
Yeah, I feel like if all treatments came with something that sterilized the drones and the colonies that they were being used on, that would very quickly solve any type of unfitness. It's just an idea that I've had many
It
times.
would. I would say
Um,
that a method like that would probably be really expensive.
because like I was trying to explain to a buddy to a dude who came by to get some honey today, um, that yeah, when you have goats or sheep or cows, because I hate when people bring up the analogy, oh well, you would treat your cow or you would treat your dog or your cat. You can control what cows breed with what bull. You can pen one. You can keep them separate, and that's
Yeah,
why it's so different too. You can keep
you hit the nail on the head, because you can't control where bees go.
yeah. So that's why it's not cruel to not treat your bees, which would be another question. What do you think of people saying treatment free beekeepers are just a bunch of animal abusers? They don't care about their bees. They're lazy. I deal with these things all the time, and I'm constantly pushing back on people that think that. But so that would
Yeah,
mean that
so
all these other places are.
I will, I'm going to say, because I've dealt with a lot of beekeepers, and on both sides, and stuff, and the beekeepers that went treatment free that I have worked with, uh, I would not, the like lazy is the last word I would use to associate with them, and stuff. I mean, if you think when Varroa hit, it was devastating for everybody. Like, everybody went through that. It was a nightmare. It was horrifying when you just, you had bees and everything was fine. Then all of a sudden everything was dead and you didn't know why. when Varroa hit. In Europe it was terrible. So I mean, I can tell you the story of Tarja. When Varroa hit Norway and everybody was losing bees and they were in an absolute panic. And then people said, okay, we have Europe has these treatments now. We're going to use these treatments. Here's the regime. Just do it. They chose organic acids. But the dosage may have been a little high for the types of bees that were in Norway, and also the environment, which was a lot colder and more temperate and stuff. So they ended up overdosing their bees on these acids, and a lot of them died as a result of that. So this is the situation that Tarja was faced with. He's like, well, I could let the mites kill my bees, or I could kill my bees myself. Like, what is my choice here, really? So I was like, I choose not to kill my bees myself. And so that was his scenario. So he decided to work with the bees that survived, because not everything died, and he worked very hard, and he lost a lot of colonies. It was really difficult, but he built them back, and they ended up, now his population has the lowest loss rates of any other hives in the area. So in the long run, it was actually much better for his bees, if you ask him, and honestly, if you ask me as well. So I think the assumption that you're being cruel to your bees is in a very short term. And yes, it's difficult. Yes, you will lose more bees than other people who just continuously treat. But if you're looking in the long term, if you're constantly removing the selection pressure, you're going to constantly have to put chemicals on your bees. And eventually it's going to be unsustainable, because what we know about mites, and we know about the viruses they spread and everything, is they adapt and evolve. And there's a lot of chemicals now that the Varroa has adapted to, so that aren't effective anymore. So, what happens when the treatments you use stop being effective? You're going to lose the bees anyway. So I mean, that's why I was researching these resistances. So if you can, work resistance into your colonies, you don't have to stop treatments cold turkey. You can phase them out through like an integrative pest management system. You can look for colonies that are good survivors, and you can try rolling back treatments a little bit on those hives and still treat the hives that look like they're not going to be doing well. And then selectively breed from the colonies that are good survivors without killing any of your bees. So, there are lots of things you can do to mitigate colony death and to mitigate colony suffering. But if you continually do nothing and just treat, eventually you're going to have to face the problem, or there's going to be something else on top of Varroa that you have to deal with. So, I mean, I believe in passing on the information that you can actually select to solve these problems, and that we should be trying to solve these problems through natural selection and allow evolution to help us. One, because it's a really incredible tool that's been around for millions of years, and it can keep up with the threats. Once you have a resistant population, no matter how the mites change, the bees will change with them. And generally, you're not going to get a drastic enough shift in a year or two that the bees don't lose only a few of their hives and then just get it back after. So they shift with the parasite.
Yeah, I mean,
So that's why I believe in treatment-free beekeeping or resistance breeding and stuff. You can do it without killing your bees. It's possible.
yeah, a few of the things that I say a lot. I know that you're one of the lucky ones who hasn't seen my channel yet, but I say that selection never stops. It never stops. So I have
Nope.
a lot of trolls on my email saying, "Oh well, if your bees are so great, why do some of your bees still die?" And I say it's because selection doesn't ever stop. Um,
No, and that's not having nothing die. That's not how evolution. That's not how life works.
and
You
that's also
always
not how
have
beekeeping
selection.
ever was. You'll hear these
Ever
old head,
was.
yeah, old head beekeepers. Oh, I had 100 colonies, and in the winter I would come out of winter with 110. Or if one died, I would have a funeral and everybody would cry about it. And it's just not true. You can look at the old literature, and people were losing tons of bees in the 1800s and 1900s,
Yeah.
way before
And
Varroa.
losses went up and down based on the environment, what was happening during that year, and what viruses were prominent and stuff. And generally, whenever a virus makes a shift, or whenever a parasite makes a shift, you got a high loss rate.
Yeah,
That's it. Except now we have to deal with, habitat loss and destruction, like no forage and all these other problems, as well as introduce parasites and pests.
right. So yes, and that's another thing that I say is there's no selection without death, really. Um, even if you're just requeening a colony, yeah, you're keeping the worker bees, but that whole line is dead now. You just started over
Yeah.
again, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
I don't have anything wrong with. I don't feel there's anything wrong with people who do whatever they want to do with their bees if they treat or not. I just, but they need to understand. Which brings me to my next question. Something I say, it might you maybe you don't want to answer this. I don't know, but I
I'll
feel
do my
like
best.
I feel like beekeepers. I'm gonna try to say it the nice way, but beekeepers in general, just being a person who's always been interested in evolution and evolutionary biology and just field biology, I feel like beekeepers, a very good number of them, have no idea about anything except for beekeeping, like how to put bees into a box, and then how to make sure they make a bunch of honey for them to sell. They don't know anything about nature or selection or just anything like that, and that's why they can't grasp like some bees have to die. They can't just let some of them die, and why they. What's your what's your opinion on the on the
Um,
biological education of the general beekeeper?
so my background is evolutionary biology, so I kind of like, for my academic career grew up with it. But, if I had to think back, I think before Varroa, before, industrialized pesticide use and stuff like that, knowing beekeeping, that was all you had to know because, you had the forage, you had the space, there was no large, huge threat to beekeeping, not on the scale that we have now. So, I mean, you didn't have to know about evolution or how things change because there was always enough. And but now with things changing so quickly, after the Industrial Revolution, we're losing natural space at a rate of knots. So the forage, the wildflowers, how we do farming is completely different. There's not a lot of wild space left for bees to forage on, which means their food diversity is narrowing, which means their health is not great. And then, to add into that, we've got, stuff like, more severe droughts or, flooding. The weather is going a little nuts, and we've got these introduced pests and pathogens. The Varroa itself isn't the only thing in that system that is killing colonies. It is the deformed wing virus. It's other viruses that the Varroa actually vectors, and that's what's causing the huge problem. So you now you have to understand about parasites and how they interact with viruses. Now you have to understand about a little bit about evolution. Otherwise nothing changes, and you end up with these massive losses, because you have a small level of genetic diversity and a massive amount of colonies, or you have a whole bunch of pesticides running alongside your farm that you don't realize is affecting your bees. Now there's all these other factors which for the last 100 years or so we've had to incorporate. So we don't have the luxury anymore, I think, of knowing, not knowing about anything else about how nature works, how biology works, and we're catching up with that. And I think a lot of people I talk to do actually understand and are starting to read about it. But this stuff is also not taught
Yeah,
in most schools. I mean, my education came from university. I had to go to a university and spend, over over 8 hours a day learning this stuff for 4 years at least to be able to comprehend and apply it. So it's a lot about what is taught. It's a lot about what's available. Um, and if it's not readily available, I think a lot of people just assume that it's not need to know. I would absolutely love it if we started introducing more biology, more nature courses in schools, so people had a baseline as to how things worked in nature, so they started asking questions, they started learning outside of that on their own.
yeah. There's a video that I didn't react to yet, but I watched it. I couldn't believe it. A beekeeper that had, I don't know, 1,500 colonies, and he stood there and looked into the camera and said something about the way he said it. He said, what I think I really need to do is start start taking the bees that I have and letting the ones that live just breed from those. And then maybe they'll pass that down. He goes, I don't know about it. I don't believe in none of this evolution or selection stuff. He goes, but I feel like the bees will just adapt and they'll pass it. He almost perfectly explained what
That's
evolution
evolution.
and after selection is. but he just
Yeah.
didn't believe in the thing that he was talking about, and I was like, wow, that hurt my head just to hear that. But I didn't react to it yet, and I probably won't
And
now.
then
But
there's a question of is it the concept you don't believe in, or is it the people teaching the concept that you don't believe in? Because that also plays a factor in it too.
yeah,
And scientists really need to be a little bit more open and engaging with the general public. I think a lot of the times, when I've spoken to beekeepers, they don't have a good impression of scientists. Okay, well, why? Like we really need to start engaging a bit more and actually talking to people. We're not up in an ivory tower somewhere. We're actually human beings, and we are supposed to make the world a better place. That's what I believe anyway.
yeah, yeah. I agree. There can be some scientists that are very, they can put you off. You just feel like, they're not. They're up there somewhere where they're not going to
I
talk
know
bad.
more than you, and yeah, that
Yeah,
that mentality. I
they'll
hate
be
that.
like, well, what is your PhD in, Bruce? I'm like, well, I don't have a PhD in it, but I do know how selection works. But um, so just before I forget, and another thing that I just commented on in a recent video, because and the assertion is made that survival stock bees that can survive without treatments are aggressive and defensive. I might have one defensive colony. I mean, just my anecdotal situation is I have one colony that might be defensive, and only as the summer progresses, every single one of my other ones I can work with no, just smoke,
Yeah,
bare hands, shorts, t-shirt. They've never been treated. No, I don't do brood breaks. I don't do anything. Like no, there's
yeah.
no um, essential oils. In your research or in your experience, do you find that this stock that survives, is it the person described it as you have to wear chainmail around these bees. Have you ever had that before?
I have never had to wear chainmail around the bees that I work with. And I will say that Terry Reinertsen stock, which is the stock I started working with, is the nicest stock of bees I have ever had the pleasure to work with. They are still on the comb. They are calm. You cannot make these bees angry. The only time you're going to meet a little bit of opposition is if they're hungry, and then you feed them and they calm right down.
Yeah.
To the
Oh,
point where if there's a colony that was unlabeled, I would go, I would work with them. I was like, that's Taria's stock. Those are his bees. Those are not his bees. And it would be a Carnica stock, which is supposed to be an award-winning stock and stuff. But they were, they were running around the comb. They were flighty. They were, getting in the way and stuff. I could do my work and finish one of Taria's colonies in about 10 minutes, where it took me half an hour with some of the other bees because they would just move too much.
do you keep
So,
any of your own bees? Do
I
you,
do not have my bees. I do not have any bees at the moment. So most of my research was done on other people's bees that had reared this stock. I looked after bees while I was doing the research, so I kept a couple of apiaries during my PhD and stuff. So I've worked extensively with bees, but I don't actually consider myself a beekeeper because I've
see,
never kept bees for like extensive amount of time, just for the research.
I do find that a lot too. That's another thing that, just to be honest, it does bother me sometimes. Like, because there are some, how the industry or the community, like, they have these people. I call them like darlings. That kind of pop up, like researchers or just beekeepers. But a lot of the researchers I find just they don't keep bees, or they got their PhD in like pond snails or something like that, and then they went right from that to Varroa mites, and then they became like this grand poobah of Varroa mite beekeeping, and they don't even
Yeah,
keep bees. Like, I don't even know if they even work bees. Like, they're only in the lab with bees. So
and I would say they're probably very good researchers. But do they understand the ins and outs of what a beekeeper goes through day to day? Absolutely not.
right. Um, let's see. I got to the. I mean, I still have a couple more, but what do you think of probiotics? To me, and what do you think? I don't know. I did hear one researcher say it's just basically baloney, and that's what I thought at the outset. But what do you think?
Well, it's because it's a very broad topic. Like everything's got probiotics. So you're talking about gut flora. So, I mean, maybe people don't want to hear this, but there is actually like an ecosystem in your gut of different beneficial bacteria that help you break down food that help you process nutrients. They deal with the immune system and allergic reactions, so they can actually, prevent allergic reactions to things you're not supposed to react to, and stuff. And it actually keeps your body healthy, right? Every single organism has this gut flora, this ecosystem. Bees have it too. So when you're talking about probiotics, you're talking about seeding the gut with beneficial bacteria. Humans take probiotics. You take them if you've had antibiotics, to just replenish the good bacteria in your body. So depending on how they're administered and what they are, it has the potential to be very beneficial. Do we understand everything about our gut flora and what goes on in there? Absolutely not. There's a lot we don't understand. There's a lot we don't know. There's a lot of people that are willing to take advantage of the fact that we don't know to sell you something that might not work.
Oh, that's a big subject there. Very big subject.
So, when someone says probiotics, I mean, that could mean a wealth of different things. I'll give you an example. I mean, one of the beneficial bacteria that humans take is lactobacillus, I think, which is a lactic acid bacteria. It does a lot of good things for your gut. We really don't know exactly how much good it does, but we know it's there and we know it doesn't hurt you, and it actually provides services in your gut. I don't know. I couldn't actually name the types of bacteria that are good for bees' guts. So I don't know. I can't recommend, this bacteria that they know works for bees, so you should treat your bees with that. I can't tell you any of that stuff. But I do know that, probiotics and bacterial gut flora, that is a thing. That's real.
Yeah. I mean, I know that humans, well, mammals, and maybe reptiles also in some way, but I know we get it from our mother. If we're or most mammals get it from their first feeding. But where do bees get that? Does that come from them being fed as larvae? Probably. I mean,
Yeah, and a lot you can actually get from your environment as well, from the food you eat, and even just from the places you exist in. So a lot of the bacteria that are going to be in the gut for bees, they'll probably get it from the nurse bees that feed them. That's probably where they start.
okay.
And whether the colony is healthy or not, or how many detrimental bacteria are in the hive and stuff, that can affect the gut flora as well.
Right. And okay, that makes sense. Can you tell me about the bees in Cuba at all? Because I have a very persistent person that I corresponded with who tells me that they treat their bees in Cuba. And from all that I've heard, and I have the book. Oh, no, now I can't find it. But from Stephen Martin, I guess his name was, that talks about the Cuban bees. And
this is great because he's actually a co-author in my book.
Right, yeah, which we were just about to talk about. Well, what do you know about the Cuban bees? Are they treated?
So
is there anything they do that I would call a treatment, like brood breaks, drone removal, caging the queen, or anything like that?
So I'll tell you cool stuff about bees. So Stephen Martin, I am a rookie compared to him. He's been researching Varroa for over 40 years. He knows his stuff. He's an excellent researcher, and he was the one who went down to Cuba personally to investigate these bees. And from his, firsthand account, because I spoke to him at length about these bees, there is nothing that they do, because when Varroa hit, the Cuban government basically said, look, we don't have the money to buy treatments, so you're just going to have to deal. And that's what they did. A lot of bees died. They lost a lot of their stock. The government subsidized it where they could, and the beekeepers built it back up from the survivors. But the cool thing is because a lot of people just assumed that the Cuban stock was half Africanized, and Africanized bees tend to do better against Varroa than straight European bees. When they actually did the genetic testing, they found that these bees are European honeybees. So they don't actually have a lot of African genes in them at all. So you have this whole stock of European honeybees that adapted to Varroa only because nobody could treat. There was physically no way for them to treat against Varroa. So they don't. I'm sure there's a lot of beekeepers that manage their bees exactly how they think they should be managed. There might be brood rakes, but in terms of a standardized treatment plan or way, there wasn't one as far as I know.
Yeah, I interviewed somebody from South Africa probably a year or two now, and a year or two ago, and his story was just really, really interesting. The same thing happened while they did have the resources and the money to do it if they wanted to. They just decided they weren't going to do it. So they took what some people will call massive losses. So massive losses can also be very relative to the person. Like someone might
Yeah.
consider 40% massive losses. To me, that's just like that's not even splitting my bees in the spring. That's not even splitting all of them. So that's not massive to me. Massive to me would be like 95%, which I've had that
Yeah.
one time. But yeah, the way they bounced back and he just really found it hilarious the way Americans in Facebook groups or on YouTube how they're constantly talking about mites. He just thought it was ridiculous. They never talk about them. It's just like he didn't even really understand why I wanted to talk about it. But yeah, their bees survive. Some still die, but there's just never been treated. They never do it. It's just no one would
Yeah.
ever think of treating their bees in South Africa, at least where he's at.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's generally the norm across Africa. Is, if you have, Africanized bees or scutellata or something, they tend to actually not have a lot of problems with the mite, so they're fine anyway. And then you get South Africa, you get the Cape honeybee and stuff like that, which is a little more susceptible. But I haven't heard of any drastic losses in Africa. Like, so they were hit, but they are okay.
Yeah, and it seems like it's there's so many places in the world except for here. Except for here, we just can't adapt it. We can't wrap our heads around. Not we, but many people can't wrap their heads around it. Our problem was that we had plenty of money to develop treatments that so many worked and then didn't work and then worked and then didn't work. And right now they have one that I guess kind of works, except for maybe this year it didn't work. But I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, and I guess it's always the system as well, because I don't think I know of any other place in the world where you have pollination beekeepers with so many colonies. And they've got a very unique way of doing that compared to the rest of the world as well, when they're moving these bees across the country in these huge pallets. Um, and it's just they go to almonds, right? And then I think sometimes they go up to blueberries, and then they get put in these lots where they're just there.
Yeah. So over here, just on this channel, because you haven't seen this channel, but I'm kind of not very. I don't speak of commercial beekeeping too positively because I mean it's okay that you brought it up, but I generally tell people I just don't care about. It's kind of like I also have a couple chickens. I have a couple chickens. I don't
I would
care.
guess that that's probably where the money's going, is to the industry, right? Because they need to keep that.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't worry about like what Purdue is doing or like whatever the big chicken issues are. Yeah, so commercial industry, I think a lot of the research and a lot of the beekeeping hobby in general is just so messed up by trying to follow commercial beekeepers. It's just I don't find anything they do enjoyable or like nothing
It's
I
a
strive
business.
for. I don't strive for it. It's just like terrible to me. But now,
I would
so
say
you
some things probably need to change. I'd say, because if you take a look at that, where these bees are being kept, like there's one thing for them to pollinate, and there's nothing else. Like there's no natural diversity in this stuff. Every weed and flower in the lot seems to have been eradicated outside of the crop, right? Do
and
correct me if
almond
I'm wrong. That
pollination.
seems to be the norm.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never really been interested in. I mean, I do see some videos about it. I just don't find it interesting. I really don't know how to say it. I mean, I love bees. I love wasps and ants and every type of insect and bug. I love gardening and plants and selection and grafting, doing all kinds of stuff. But commercial beekeeping, I just don't care about it. Um, so yeah, I don't know much about it. But about oh, are you there?
Yep. Are
Okay,
we there? Did I get you back? Okay, good.
can you hear
Sorry,
me?
you were gonna say something. Yeah, I
Oh
can hear you.
no, I was going to say, if you want to tell me about the book that you're working on, is it, just tell me whatever you want to tell me. I know that you have a what do you call it? A Kickstarter?
Kickstarter, yeah. So I'm really excited about this book. So I've been doing honeybee research for over 10 years now, and I have learned such an incredible amount. I met so many incredible people doing resistance breeding and all of the amazing research that's been done. I mean, they've done everything from genetics to looking at hydrocarbons to looking at, hygienic behaviors and everything. There's so much. And I've met a lot of beekeepers who have been able to breed resistant bees, and I know a lot of cases all over the world. From Stephen and Marla, who are two of the co-authors on this book. I figured, we have enough now to actually write a decent book. It's not going to be so much of a guide as it's going to be kind of a showcase of all of the different examples we can find of people who have successfully bred Varroa resistant honeybees, what they have done, and then draw parallels from each case and then come up with kind of like a step-by-step on what they have done, the most common methods and results and stuff. So it's not going to be a how-to, but it is going to tell, other beekeepers how this has been done. We're going to bring the science into this, what agrees with these methods, what doesn't agree with these methods, what was changed, what stayed the same between, case to case. So I really want to get that kind of into a book that is, in a context that the beekeepers can read, they can understand, hopefully they can find enjoyable. I think we have enough information now, and it really needs to get out because a lot of people are asking questions about resistance breeding. A lot of people want to stop treatments or get bees to adapt. And I think the desire is out there. So I've started this Kickstarter to get like a little bit of money so we can finish the research and we can write the book and get it out there and publish it. So that's what the Kickstarter is there for. So if you want to support it, I'd be really grateful. You can at least check out the page. There's some really cool rewards there too, and including signed copies of the book, art prints that I actually painted myself, and a little plush toy as well, a honeybee plush toy that was designed specifically for the project.
I could
So there's
probably
some cool stuff.
I could pull up the page if you want me to here.
Yeah, you could.
I didn't even
You
think
can
of
check it
that.
out.
What was? Does it have a? What's the Is it a short
The
link or
project
is it?
title, it's called Resisting Varroa, and you
Res-
can search that on Kickstarter.
Okay, so I should go to Kickstarter first.
Yeah, or I think I sent you the link. I'm not sure if it's going to be in the.
Oh, you know what?
In the comments.
Oh, hold on. Oh no, because I did that over my phone. Let me just check real quick. Kickstarter.
Yeah, there should be a search bar in the front page of Kickstarter, and if you type in resisting space Varroa, mine should be the first project.
All right, let me find the resisting. Oh man, so this is the the moment I'm gonna misspell stuff. Resisting. Hold on. VARR. Did I? Oh, there it is. Okay. Yeah, because I was looking at this a couple days ago. Let me see. Let me see if I can share this. Present. I'm terrible at this. Share screen. There we go. Oh. Okay.
There you go. That's what it looks like.
This is what it looks like, and yeah, there. I'm gonna get in here. I don't know what level I'll be at, but okay. So you're making some progress. Let me get rid of this here.
So you can donate pretty much whatever you want. You don't have to pick a tier. You can donate, $5 or something like that. And but there's definitely some cool rewards in it for people who want to pick a tier to back.
Okay, and I love bee books. And you said Rich. What's his name again? Richard.
Stephen.
Oh no, Stephen Martin. Yeah, I keep forgetting. Yep. He has the same name as the comedian, but his book was really hard to put down. I mean, I ended up eventually putting it down with just a little bit left, and it's up here on my shelf, and I can't reach it without standing up and probably knocking my whole thing apart. But yeah, I really like his writing. I think it was called like The Solution to Varroa or something like that, or the Varroa Solution.
Okay.
But
yeah, no, he's a very good researcher. And he's a co-author on the book, so he's going to be writing sections of it as well. He's going to talk about his research in Hawaii and his work with the queen breeders there. And I'm hoping to get him to talk a little bit about Cuba as well.
Okay.
And
Right.
then hopefully we're going to have Marla writing a little bit about the paw line and her experience working with the labs in the U.S. And then I'm going to be covering the Europe bit.
Yeah, and Dr. Marla Spivak or Spivak, how do you say that?
Spivak,
Spivak?
I think.
Spivak?
I've never heard her say it, honestly, so I don't know. I could be embarrassing myself really badly here.
Yeah, just you have to say it just extremely wrong, just so she fixes it. But I never attached her name in my brain to treatment-free beekeeping for some reason. I don't know what 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 do you know about research she's done? Is she the one that
Uh,
did something about propolis or something like that?
she was one of the ones that I think almost started it. She worked with the Baton Rouge lab. She worked on the original VSH lines, with relative success. In terms of commercial production, though, it was difficult to get the traits to stay in the stock. So she was working on that, and she was working on hygienic behavior mostly and stuff. But her work is really fascinating. I strongly recommend looking up some of her papers and seeing what she's done. I think now she's working with a few commercial stocks, and they are actually breeding for resistance as well. These big beekeepers are taking a small section of their hives and they are doing the selection and then reintroducing the queens into their full stock and seeing how they do. So I think that is the pollen lines. I haven't seen the data personally, like black and white, so I can't say much to it. But so far as I've heard, it's doing okay.
Yeah, it's another thing I've heard of Pauline. What's that short for? Paul POL?
Oh
Is
gosh, you
it
really
P?
put me on the spot here. Yeah,
I forget. I don't know.
I'm gonna
Um,
have to look that up. I'm sorry. I don't remember.
maybe it's yeah.
I just remember what it's called. There's Pauline and the Pauline 2, which is the new stock that they're
All
working
right.
on there.
Okay, so yeah, the link to the Kickstarter is
So
going to
that's
be
it.
it's going to be in the description down there. So it's easy to
Yeah,
find.
yeah. Check it out if you got time.
Yep, check through the comments here, see if anyone has questions.
Oh yeah, I love questions.
Frank is asking if it's possible to cross the what he's saying is the American honeybee, which is or the European honeybee, with the bees that started the Mite issue, which I'm guessing he means Apis.
Serrana.
Yeah. Can they crossbreed?
Uh,
Is what he's asking.
no. As far as I know, they cannot. They are different species, and they cannot cross. We tried crossing species that could interbreed. That was the African bees and the European honeybees. That didn't go so well. So I would say let's not, because honestly, the European honeybees they do actually have what they need. We just need a little time to work with them.
Yeah, and I follow another beekeeper from Japan who keeps their native bees and also keeps European honeybees in the same apiary, and and she, there was a bit of a translation problem. I was trying to ask her like, do you treat the European bees that you have there? And they didn't. So like they have the bees right there in the same apiary as the original Varroa mite bees. The only
Yeah.
difference is that the Asian giant hornet there can kill a whole European colony, but it can't kill an Asian colony just because they have different
Not the
defenses.
Japanese honeybees. Yeah, because they've got an extraordinary defense. Yeah, YouTube that if you ever get a chance. The
Yeah,
Japanese honeybees defense against the hornet. That is really cool.
yeah, I've seen a couple of those, but I just thought that was really interesting that you can just have them right there, and if they're
Yeah.
going to survive there,
Interestingly, yeah, that's true.
um,
I was going to say the balling behavior, actually, you have some balling behavior in European honeybees too, if you're talking about, because a lot of European countries now have problems with not the Asian giant, but another predatory hornet that's taking out colonies. And some colonies are actually balling these hornets. They're not cooking them like the Japanese honeybees can do, but the starts of these behaviors, they're already there.
yeah, it's because they can ball a queen. I've seen that many times, and
Exactly. So it's a general defense behavior, and so that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't have too many questions in here, but
Okay, clear as mud. I like it.
okay. What's that? Yeah. Let me see. Did I have any? You might be seeing more comments than me because for some reason over here my thing is not really working too well. My comments section.
I haven't clicked on this. Okay, here you go. I see a lot of comments. Yeah.
Yeah, mine didn't.
Hello, Nancy.
Yeah, so that was all the questions I had. I mean, I appreciate you coming on
Yeah,
and answering them.
I was gonna say. Yeah, if you have any questions, type them in now because I think we're about to wrap up.
Yep. I'll just give them another minute here. Um, and then yeah, I hope if we don't get any more questions, I'll definitely support the book and I'll look forward to reading it. I should definitely finish the last like
Thank you
20
very much.
pages of Stephen's book.
Got
Uh,
thoughts on treatment-free beekeeping? I guess if you're looking for kind of advice that I would give to you, I mean, I advocate for using treatments when you have to, just to try and mitigate colony death and mite spread. Because a lot of people, especially in Europe, the colony density is really high. You have to share space with a lot of people. A lot of people are really against treatment-free beekeeping only because they're afraid that they're going to get all the mites. Um, but if we've been working on strategies that kind of control the mite and mitigate it so that there is less of a spread out. I think a lot of people might be a little warmer to the idea if people can do this without the threat of giving mites to everybody else, which is possible. So that's what I say. I would say, use integrative pest management. Don't blanket treat everything, but, do your research, do some counts, and treat when needed. That's what I say. But I mean, every situation is different, so it's really difficult to give kind of flat advice to everybody because everyone's situation, it changes.
so for me,
And
just
it,
as the treatment free beekeeper, it's been that has pretty good success. I mean, I'm not pat myself on the back, but the reason that I don't have a treat when necessary protocol is because too many times I've seen bees that look like they were going to die and they didn't die. And too many times I
yeah,
have very, very beautiful colonies going into November, December. Perfect everything. Honey, strong population. And in January, they're dead. So I don't
it's
see,
so hard.
yeah,
It's
there's
really hard.
to me, there's no such thing as treat when you have to, unless you're just going to treat everything and just keep everything alive. And that's for commercial beekeeping behavior. It's definitely will never improve. I mean, just according to fitness and selection, like it'll never keeping something alive that you think is going to die is never to me is never going to improve or select for
Yeah.
bitter.
Well, never say never. I mean, people could change their mentality. We'll have to just keep working on it, keep banging on the drum, and get people one by one. I mean, in when I started in Norway, nobody believed in treatment-free beekeeper. They called Tarja a joke. They didn't believe him. It was only when I came in and started publishing on it. It's like, yeah, actually, this is a real thing. And now they have a national strategy for resistance breeding. So it's getting there slowly.
Um, yeah. Dude, let me
Yeah.
see. Yeah,
We got
so
one question
somebody's in.
here. Could stingless bees could stingless bees, I guess that would be bred into the honeybee? Um, no, we have stingless bees. They're called Melipona. It's a genus. They can't interbreed with honeybees. Um, I don't know if breeding stingless bees is a good idea because they really need those stings for defense. There's a lot of things that want to eat their honey and their brood.
Yeah, sometimes like I removed the colony a couple weeks ago that I didn't use smoke at all. Their whole tree trunk smacked the ground really hard. The combs fell out. I was wearing this like what I have on. I didn't get stung one time. Like they were covering me. They were all over me, but they were more like just landing on me. They weren't like buzzing me. They had zero
Yeah.
defense. They were a 0 out of 10 on a defensive scale. But their combs in there were as black as my shirt. Like they've been in there for forever. At least somebody been in there forever. So I didn't keep any of their combs, but now I have them in my backyard, and they're like one of my favorite. I always have a favorite colony. It's usually a
Aw.
removal. It's usually like my first removal of the year, just because of what they went through. I moved them like in the cold when they should have been even
Mhm.
meaner because it's cold. I just love these bees, and they're tiny. They're
Aw.
really, really tiny, which could be another question.
That's
We'll look at
interesting.
um,
Yeah,
I do get
size.
yeah. I dealt with an email again the other day about quote unquote small cell. I always have to put my little Mite quotes up because my position is that there's no such thing as small cells. There's the cells that the bees build, and then there's enlarged cells which are on foundation, commercial foundation, which is like
I did a
anywhere.
deep dive into the cell size thing actually, and I came up with there was a very interesting paper written in 2015 which actually looked at the origin of where small cell size came from, where they calculated this, the volume of this cell, and it ended up being smaller than your traditional 5.3 diameter cell that's built on the standard comb, and I think it ended up being a math error. This paper concluded so that the small cells weren't actually a thing. And if you let bees build comb naturally, the cells tend to be a little bit smaller in the center of the comb, but they tend to get bigger out, and that's just how the frame is built. When I looked at small cell size, because there was a huge question in Norway, I found a little bit of an advantage in the Varroa reproductive success, but it wasn't enough of an advantage to say that it would actively control the mites or do anything to mitigate the population growth. So, I mean, maybe it does a little bit, but it's certainly not going to solve your problem.
Yeah, no, I mean that's the same thing I found just from experience that I've had bees that made comb cells, consistently 4.5, 4.4 millimeters, even smaller than small cell, tiny bees, and they still could die, and they still would die.
Yeah.
And then there's people that I know that use right cell foundation, which is the biggest you can get. It's like 5.4 millimeters per cell. So those bees are just a step down from small drones, and they don't use treatments, and their bees still live. So I don't correlate cell
Yeah.
size with mite uh,
It's
numbers
not a
dropping
strong
or
pattern,
anything.
and I think it gets overridden by a lot of other factors
Yeah, it's just to me, it's
stuff. We
just
got a
interesting
question
to see.
here. Sorry,
That's okay.
finish it. There's from Weirhawk 100, I think. Do you think certain humidity level can kill Varroa inside the hive? I think I dealt with this question on another podcast. In theory, maybe, but the homeostatic nature of the hive, so the fact that the bees keep everything the exact temperature and humidity they love at all times, would probably prevent that from being an effective strategy, because whatever humidity you introduce to the hive, the bees would just fix it right away. So it probably wouldn't be a very good control strategy, no.
Okay. Um, some somebody wants to know how many bees had to be on Noah's Noah's Ark. Yeah, I think that was a joke that I may have
I
made.
don't know.
Yeah. Um,
That's one of the questions. I don't know.
yeah, there you go. We don't know.
Your guess is as good as mine. I'm not sure.
All right. Well, we can wrap it up here. It was a nice hour and a half, perfect amount of time.
Yeah, that was
Um,
fun.
Thanks for being my guest today. Anytime if something new
Thank you for
comes up,
having
just
me.
send me a message. If some type of new subject comes up, or if you ever want to come look at some bees that absolutely do not ever get treated and are tiny and are
I would
pretty
love
cool.
to actually, because I always love comparing the honeybees that I've seen in Europe to any other population. Do I see recapping? Do I see brood removal and stuff? What's going on in the hives? And that's always fascinating to me.
All right.
So
Sounds
anyway,
good to me.
yeah. So I think the next step for me is getting the actual scientific paper on the breeding program that I just did for the last 4 years out and publishing that, as well as working on the book as much as I can. Yeah, that's it for me, and I will keep you updated. And maybe we can have another session either when the paper comes out or when we're a bit further along with the book.
All right. And with that, we'll end it. Thanks again. Everyone, thanks for watching.
All
Take care.
right.
Have a good night. I'll be right back in a minute here.
Thank you.